Hello, guys, and welcome to my first power rankings of the 2025-2026 season. I kind of wanted to do this after week 7, where essentially a little over, a third of the year through, and I just wanted to kind of get a gauge for my own personal opinion and really give, I guess, my 2 cents on who I actually think the best teams are in the league right now. Starting off with none other actually than Cincinnati. Now, Cincinnati is a very odd one. They are obviously 3-4 right now. You look at, they've obviously won their first 2 games, which was uncharacteristic of them in previous years. And then they go on a 4-game losing streak. And ultimately, they traded for Joe Flacco, obviously, before they played Green Bay last week, and then they beat Pittsburgh this week, where Flacco ultimately dominated through the air. They had a pretty good run game, and Chase had his first, or I guess not even his first, his really good game of the year, having another game where he had over 160 yards receiving. Now, the reason I am putting them here is because I really think that you look at them and they really just needed that guy to lead the offense. Jamar Chase, to me, I would say he's the best wide receiver in football. Obviously, and I'm not just saying that because he had the triple crown last year. I think he's just an unbelievably humble guy that, just wants to get his chances. Isn't really going to complain that much, but you kind of saw him sulking a little bit with Browning because of the lack of QB play that's consistent. But now with Flacco, a guy who to me, has a lot more leadership and has been around the league, you have a guy that's going to be able to dish it to him, Higgins, and even get Yoshi Vosh involved, and did a very good job against Pittsburgh. I know it's not a lot to go on, but in my opinion as well, you kind of looked at Flacco against the Green Bay Packers, and he did very well after only having ultimately like 4 days of practice and that sort of thing. And he just brings a leadership that I think warrants putting them here. And they were able to beat Pittsburgh, who we thought, oh, they're going to run away with this game because of the way their defense had been playing. And Cincinnati just ultimately kind of stalled them with a line that looked a lot better. And if their line is a lot better, this is a team to me that can score a lot of points. And while their defense wasn't anything crazy special, they did enough to win this game, and they did it without Hendrickson. So while it's kind of a bold take at 10, I was kind of like, what's a team to me that screams that maybe they deserve to kind of eke up on here in what has been a weird NFL season? Now coming in at number 9, probably another kind of spicy take, and we'll know a little bit more about this team afterwards, is the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, really handling Washington, and in a never in doubt game where they get Lamb back. He posts 110 receiving yards. Javonte Williams has 116 yards, and Prescott passes for 264. Obviously, Washington banged up, but you go into a division game like this, and one where Jaden Daniels, people are kind of like, oh, is he going to have some magic? And ultimately, the Cowboys kind of stuck it to Washington. Obviously, the week before, they got scorched by Carolina and Rico Dowdle, essentially. But I do think that Dak is playing some pretty good football this year. And while their defense obviously hasn't been very good this year, I think this is a team that really has probably one of the better offenses in the league. That it's like if they can get some points early, they're going to be a very, very hard team to beat later in the season, and especially if they have a run game, which Williams has only rushed for over 100 yards twice, but he's been very, very serviceable. I think that the run game's only going to get better with CD and Pickens around, and Dak playing very, very well. But next week we do get to see a very kind of offensive check game where they played Denver. And obviously Denver has one of the better defenses and the reigning defensive player of the year in Patrick Surtain. So Dallas is on here mainly because I think that, hey, they have a quarterback who's playing very, very well, and he was doing it without CeeDee Lamb, and he was getting it done with George Pickens, who, maybe has a lot of added motivation, but that makes them a very dangerous team, similar in a sense to the Bengals, where obviously Dak's probably more capable than Flacco, but he has two wide receivers that are 1A and 1B type of situation where they can outscore just about anybody in the league, on their best day, in my opinion. Moving on to number 8, I actually have the Lions here. The thing that I'll say about the Lions, and the reason I have them here and not any higher, is, to me, they haven't played very inspired football. You look at the 2 losses they have on the year. Obviously, the first game of the year against my Packers, where, they ultimately were only going to be able to score 6 points, if not for a late garbage TD. And ultimately, to me, Goff has just looked very perpetually stagnant, where he's doing all these dump off passes. I think last night they had like 160 yards at one point, and 140 of it was yards after the catch. Now, you don't have to be that great of a QB to be dumping off the ball to your guys and having them do the work. Don't get me wrong, that is very, very good. But you look at teams like Kansas City and Green Bay, who ultimately have kind of, I know Kansas City, maybe, the defense hasn't been the best this year, but they contained the Lions. And, everyone wants to say that, the refs, they sided with Mahomes or whatever, and they screwed the Lions type of thing. I still don't really believe that. And I think that the Lions, the other thing about them too, is that like Aiden Hutchinson is playing very, very, very good football, but their secondary is so banged up. And even when they had their guys at the beginning of the year, they were still not playing super, super well. And what teams were they really going up against, to me, that, oh my goodness, what teams were they going up that had really good passing attacks? You can say Green Bay, yes. Chicago in week 2, they didn't really do. They obviously did very, very well in the air, but Chicago, as we know, has had a very porous kind of defense this year, especially early on. Baltimore hasn't looked good, and Goff only passed for 200 in that game. Cleveland as well, a very, very good defense where Goff didn't even eclipse 200 yards, but they were able to score 34. Cincinnati, not a very good defense, and Goff puts up 258, which is respectable. But then against Kansas City, 203. And then against Tampa Bay, who honestly, they kind of looked lost on defense last night, and he puts up 241. And ultimately, their run game hasn't been very as effective. But the thing about last night, too, is that you look at their third down conversions of like 3rd and long and, 10 plus, they haven't converted any of them. So to me, it just kind of screams that, hey, teams know that they should know that Goff isn't really going to be throwing it down the field, and it's a limitation of his. And his, even last night against Tampa Bay, he overthrew several of his wide receivers. And to me, that's kind of holding them back, along with their secondary. And Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, who are kind of the staples that have been healthy but missed last night, they can't carry the whole secondary. So that's why the Lions are here. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me why that they deserve to be higher. I just think that the teams that are higher have a little bit more going for them. Moving on to number 7, we actually have Denver here. I actually really think that Denver looks like a team that could have been up there with the Colts record-wise. Obviously, the Colts did beat them, kind of off of a messed up play in a single penalty by a player at the end of the game. But looking at Denver, you lose 2 games straight, one to Indy and then one to the Chargers. and the Chargers kind of eked out a win there, and you just didn't look as consistent. Well, ever since that, this team has looked very consistent, besides against the New York Jets, which was an overall kind of porous game for whatever reason, but Bo Nix has been playing pretty well in most games. I get that against New York, they had a crazy comeback, but it's just a testament to kind of their work ethic and the way they played. And New York, by no means, they are running on fumes, and it seems like they don't care who they're playing against. They are staying true to themselves and are, I think, a better team than their record admits. But the Denver Broncos, I think, have kind of showed that, hey, through thick or thin, we're going to be able to make plays and compete in just about every single game. You know, where you look at the games they've lost, it's by a total of 4 points. Don't get me wrong, some of their wins haven't been the most flashy, but but they also played a good game against Philadelphia, where Philadelphia got up early, and then ultimately they were like, yeah, we're gonna stick it to them, and we're gonna keep pushing and playing, and had a win that week. So I think that Denver deserves kind of that grit attitude, and I think that with their defense, they warrant being up here, a team that could easily be better than 5-2. Now moving on to a team in the same division, we have the Chiefs. Now I know they're second in this division, and this and this and that, but Kansas City just kind of didn't look like a team that we would expect, with injuries to an injury to Worthy, their running game not really picking up that much until, somewhat recently, where Pacheco is starting to look like the old Pacheco. And then you get Rashee Rice back this last week, and I know he didn't do anything crazy, but it isn't, and even though it's the Raiders and it's a divisional opponent, I don't think it's easy to skunk any team. And especially the Raiders, who, Geno Smith has been able to at least move the ball, but he's been getting worse as of late. And you compete against a team like Jacksonville, who is playing lights out. Yeah, you lose, but to me, Mahomes this year has looked very locked in. There's a reason he's really high on the MVP voting, doing everything he can to carry this team. And I just think that they deserve a little bit more respect. And we're really, really going to see, if they slam the Commanders next week, a team that obviously got, kind of beat up against the Cowboys. I think that they're well on their way to kind of proving that, hey, we're a team not to be trifled with. Moving on to this next team, we have an NFC team, the Seahawks, at number 5. So the Seahawks, the reason why I can't really put them that much higher, despite being first in the NFC West, to me, is that you have some of these games where you should close out a bit better. And to me, while Darnold has looked very, very, very good, obviously Jackson Smith and Njigba has kind of taken that step, and I would argue potentially that, like, if he has a year like this, he should be talked about in the top 5. Obviously, he has, probably the best QB he's played with since getting drafted in Darnold, and Darnold has been playing very, very locked in, but it's these mistakes that they make where it's like Houston, who hasn't looked good this year, ultimately, and obviously they have a very good defense, but you weren't able to play ball control football, and that worries me. Obviously, the turnovers they had late in the game against Houston, if Houston was able to capitalize, only losing by 8 points on any of those, this could have been a game that goes into overtime, or maybe they lose to a field goal or something like that with Seattle. But the ability to run the football needs to be there. And you've only had, Walker's had a game with 105 yards, and 86 are his 2 highs. And then I guess another one with 81. But these other ones where they're all underneath Charbonnet week 1, 47 rushing. And then, all these other games with Walker leading are less than 70 yards rushing. And that is not going to be good enough in the postseason, even though their defense is playing very, very well. But I guess they're playing competition that, that hasn't really put up that much of a fight. Like Jacksonville 2 games ago, they did not really put up that much of a fight like they did the week prior against the Chiefs, where they beat them. The last tough game this team played was against Tampa Bay, when Baker was firing all cylinders, and they essentially lost to a last-second field goal. And Darnold threw for a season-high 341. But the Seahawks, the reason they're here is that they're very, very, very good, but they have these mistakes that I don't like and will cost them in big games against good teams that will capitalize on these number of mistakes. Moving up to number 4, we have the New England Patriots. I am very, very happy and proud, I guess, of this team. Now, I'm obviously not a fan, but I think that Drake May last year, with seemingly nothing, no O-line, no weapons, no run game or anything, was fitting the ball into, tight windows. And I was like, if he gets the chance, if he gets a little bit better of an O-line, if the weapons are, better than what they looked like when they didn't have an O-line because the quarterback has no time, perhaps this team is better. Obviously, they pick up Stefon Diggs, who has been a good addition to this team. But you have, Kayshon Boutte with a couple of games where he's the leading wide receiver. You have Hunter Henry, who's obviously a very good tight end, having even a 90-yard game. And then Diggs with a few games where he's dominated. And I guess not so much in this last one. They beat a Tennessee team that ultimately are a very bad team and kind of self-imploded, but that's a credit to a New England Patriots defense that has been playing very, very, very well, where the most they've given up in a game this year is 27 points to the Dolphins in week 2. But since then, their highest game they've given up was to Buffalo, where they gave up 20. And all these other teams beneath 20, so their defense has been very, very good. And I think that their D-line is very, very good. And their defense doesn't have a lot of weaknesses. So that's why New England is here. And I think that they will continue to kind of develop this offense into something better with Drake May and Mike McDaniel and I can't remember their offensive coordinator's name, you guys. But moving on to number 3, we have my Green Bay Packers. Now, the reason I put my Packers here at number 3 isn't because I'm a homer. It isn't because I think we've played our best football, but we haven't played our best football, and we've only lost one game. And essentially, it was kind of our dud of a game. We played Cleveland at their stadium, first road game of the year, a tough place to play. But to me, my Packers have shown that, hey, we can score a good number of points and can typically hold teams to a low amount of points. Obviously, Arizona, Jacoby Brissett did a very, very, very good job of moving the football, and the secondary of my Packers looked somewhat suspect when you couldn't get pressure on Brissett. But ultimately, to me, some plays being made by Rashawn Gary and then, of course, Micah Parsons with his first 3-sack game, I personally think that my Packers have their best ball to play ahead of him, which is scary because like I said, they've only lost one game against, arguably the best defense in the league, or a top 5 defense. So looking at my Packers, I think that, while the best football is ahead and you're getting some of these guys back, like Christian Watson is set to come back. Obviously, Jaden Reed is still injured, but you look at even the O-line. The O-line was banged up quite a bit. But I think that my Green Bay Packers, if you put them up against most teams, they're going to be able to compete and going to be able to beat most teams, if not compete with teams that are better. And I also think that looking at, back, I guess, at Cincinnati, who I obviously had on here as kind of my, this is, a spicy power ranking pick, that I think that, moving forward, they will kind of continue to prove that they can do things. I think that they look, my Packers, after how the Bengals looked against the Steelers this week, I think that my Packers, and the way they looked against Cincinnati and beating them the way they did, I think that that's a testament to the defense. But Arizona, another team that we're visiting them, and they've been a team that hasn't lost by very many points this year and has competed in every game they are. So I think that my Packers have played teams that are tougher than people give them credit for. Like if you look at Cincinnati, once they traded and got Flacco, they do look like a different team. And obviously quarterback being the most important position, I think that's something you need to take into effect, which, is what I took into effect when I said, hey, they're a different team with Flacco. But moving on to number 2, we have the Rams here. The Rams have looked very, very, very good. They dominated Jacksonville as if Jacksonville was some no-name team. Obviously, Stafford didn't even have to throw for a crazy amount of yards in this game. He only threw for 182, but you ultimately are able to show that, hey, this is a team that can perform at a very efficient level. And they can run the football, haven't had a great running game, but they were able to beat Jacksonville without Puka Nacua. I honestly thought Jacksonville would win this game because they have a defense that's very, very good, that was, healthy besides Devin Lloyd. But I don't know if it's because they really missed him. I don't think that was the only case. But the Rams have kind of proven that, hey, they belong and they are a very good team. And their defense obviously is very, very, very good, where it's like hard to find a hole. People said the secondary, and I'm like, I don't think the secondary is as bad as people say. I think, their safeties are, good, but not great. But they don't really have a glaring issue on this team. And even the O-line has, I think, gotten better than we've been accustomed to seeing in prior years. And Stafford obviously has had 2, incredible games where he was close to 400 yards passing back-to-back weeks, one against Indianapolis and then San Francisco, where they ultimately lost an unfortunate game. But this team has all the pieces you need. Puka, Adams, Kyren Williams, the defense. I just think they're a very good team, and if you pitted them up against most teams, they would more than likely be able to beat them. But my number 1 team is going to the Indianapolis Colts. I think the Colts, they lost to the Rams, but I don't really like to base things on that, where it's like they lost to a Rams team that the prior week they had handled the Eagles and should have beat the Eagles, but blew that game. Now, you obviously have Daniel Jones playing very, very well. I like that he's, the lowest amount he's passed for is in, a couple of games where he passed for 212 in back-to-back weeks against the Raiders in Arizona. But you look at their team and you look at Taylor, they're just able to make plays. And the defense, while it's not playing anything crazy good, I feel like it's hit or miss. It's like week 1 against Miami, 8 points. Denver put up 28 points. Tennessee, put up 20, and they're kind of a mess. The Rams obviously put up 27 when they beat them. The Raiders aren't that inspiring, put up 6. Cardinals, like I said, they've been close in the majority of their games, putting up 27. And then the Chargers this last week putting up 24, but most of that was kind of garbage time points because the Colts dominated the Chargers. So you look at this team, yes, they haven't really beat the best competition. Obviously, Denver's a tough team. The Rams they played, and it was a close game. And then Arizona, I think, is, definitely better than their record states because they've made these games, the other team is, sweating when they're playing Arizona. You guys, trust me. I don't think it comes down to Kyler or Jacoby either. I think that you look at But, you know, last week, Jacoby did start, and he put up a good amount of yards and points against Arizona, against the Colts, who, like I said, they haven't played the toughest competition, but they've played well enough to earn this place. And it's been a weird year. I never thought the Colts would be number one in my power rankings. I thought they had a chance to be a bit better than last year, because last year was an up and down year, but this is my power rankings, you guys, and if you have anything else, I don't have any honorable mentions, and this is kind of what I think. It's obviously been kind of a weird year. You know, I would say my honorable mentions more than likely in all seriousness, if I'm looking at this, I would still say the Bills. The Bills, to me, their defense just hasn't been good enough. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they obviously played a close game against the Bengals. I just don't know about their defense now. I would say the Jaguars, they've obviously lost 2 now straight after beating the Chiefs, oddly enough. The Eagles, I guess. I just think the reason I don't have the Eagles on here, you guys, is because they played a Vikings team that just didn't play inspired football. I was watching that game and I'm like, you blow coverage too easily to AJ Brown. No team's going to beat a team when they give up essentially 2 free touchdowns to the top wide receiver on the other team. Like it just doesn't happen. And that sort of thing. And I still don't fully trust, Hurts with his deep balls, because he would miss some throws, and their running game obviously still, we'll see. But and maybe I would potentially consider the Bears, but I'm still waiting for the Bears to kind of play a team that's like, hey, we're going to punch you in the mouth. But those would be kind of my honorable mentions. Oh, and I guess the 49ers. But the Niners, it's weird to me about like what's going on with their team. Is the defense just happened to be overperforming and they're getting lucky? I don't know if that is the case, but they have so many injuries. I feel like it's going to catch up with them. And they've been up and down. But yeah, those are my 10 power rankings. We have the Colts at 1, Rams at 2, Packers 3, Patriots at 4, Seahawks 5, Chiefs at 6, Broncos 7, Lions 8, Cowboys 9, and Bengals 10. I did really try to put some teams that I think that people aren't really given recognition to, and I get the Bengals as kind of a spicy one, but I do really think they could, uphold this holding with how some of these other middling teams have kind of fallen off the face of the earth, these last these last couple weeks. But tell me what you guys think, and feel free to subscribe. Tomorrow I will be releasing my weekend predictions as well as Thursday night football. And as always, go Pack Go.